In the dim glow of a Seoul arena, where the air hummed with the electric pulse of 20,000 voices chanting a single name, Taehyung cracked a joke that sliced through the roar like a paper knife through silk. He was mid-performance, sweat tracing invisible rivers down his temples, his boxy grin flashing under the strobing lights as he mimed a clumsy dance step, pretending to trip over his own feet while belting out a high note that cracked just enough to sell the bit. The crowd erupted, phones aloft like a forest of glowing lanterns, capturing the moment not as vulnerability but as charm, pure, unfiltered the one who turned exhaustion into alchemy. But in that split-second fumble, his eyes flickered, a shadow passing over the stage like a cloud eclipsing the moon, and for those who knew where to look, it was there. The quiet fracture beneath the laughter, the way his shoulders dipped ever so slightly before the next line pulled him upright again. It started small, those fissures, back when the world was still learning to pronounce his name. Kim Taehyung, the boy from Daegu with the voice like smoked honey and a laugh that could disarm a room, had always been the outlier in the meticulously choreographed machine of BTS. While the others mapped their paths with precision, Jin's calculated charisma, Yoongi's brooding intensity, Namjoon's philosophical gravitas, Taehyung moved like jazz in a symphony hall, improvising riffs that bent the rules without breaking them. He was the one who'd pause during rehearsals to sketch absurd doodles on the practice room mirrors, turning fogged breath into caricatures of the members with comically exaggerated features. Jungkook's doe eyes ballooned to saucer size, Hoseok's perpetual motion blurred into a whirlwind of limbs. "See? Now we're all superheroes," he'd say, wiping the glass clean with his sleeve, his voice light as if the 12-hour grind hadn't carved hollows under his eyes. The Hyungs would chuckle, the Magnes would mimic the drawings later in the van, and the fatigue that clung to them all like stage fog would dissipate, if only for a breath. But Seoul's underbelly doesn't yield to jokes so easily. By the time the group crested their first global wave, with albums shattering records and schedules bloating into a relentless tide, airports at dawn, soundchecks bleeding into midnight interviews, fan signs where hands cramped from signing hearts, Taehyung's humor became less a sparkler and more a shield, forged in the quiet hours when the adrenaline ebbed. Picture him in a dimly lit green room, the kind with threadbare couches and vending machines humming like distant thunder, slumped against the wall after a 3-day promo sprint. The manager bursts in, clipboard in hand. "Tay, you've got that variety show taping in 20. Something about guessing animal sounds?" He doesn't sigh or slump further. Instead, he straightens, tilts his head with that trademark lopsided smile, and launches into an impression of a koala mating call, complete with exaggerated grunts and a wobbly shoulder shimmy that has the staff doubled over. They're aced it. Next, penguin proposals. The room dissolves into laughter, the tension uncoiling like a spring released, and no one notices how his fingers, splayed on his knee, tremble faintly from the crash of unspent energy. It was in those unscripted crevices that the mask took shape, layer by layer, until it fit as seamlessly as his tailored suits. Fans, those ardent cartographers of his every gesture, mapped the visible terrain. The way he'd twirl a prop mic like a baton during live streams, spinning tales of haunted dorm appliances to deflect questions about sleep. "Our fridge whispers secrets at night. Last week it confessed it hates kimchi," he'd quip, eyes crinkling at the edges while the chat exploded with heart emojis and pleas for more. They called it his fourth-dimensional charm, a phrase that trended after a concert where he ad-libbied a rap about lost socks during a mic malfunction, turning technical glitch into triumphant improv. But the devotion was a double-edged blade. Army's love was a vast, vigilant ocean, always watching, always amplifying. Every pixelated frame from fan cams dissected his micro-expressions. The brief hesitation before a punchline, the way his laugh sometimes trailed off into a cough masked as a chuckle. Forms buzzed with threads. "Is V okay?" That smile felt off, but they were drowned out by the chorus of affirmation, the collective insistence that he was unbreakable, the eternal moodmaker in a septet of stars beneath it, though the weight accumulated like sediment in a riverbed, unseen until the current shifted. There was the night in Los Angeles, after a stadium show that left the Hollywood Bowl trembling, when the group piled into a stretch limo reeking of leather and leftover adrenaline. The others dozed, heads lolling against windows fogged by the city's neon haze, but Taehyung stayed awake, scrolling through his phone with the brightness dimmed to a ghost light. A notification pinged. A fan edit. A montage of his funniest moments, set to upbeat synth, clocking millions of views. He watched it loop once, twice, his thumb hovering over the like button before he pocketed the device and turned to the window, where the freeway lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson. "Hyung," he murmured to no one in particular, though Jimin stirred faintly beside him. "You ever feel like you're directing a play where everyone's the audience, but you're the only one off stage?" Jimin mumbled something incoherent, half asleep, and Taehyung let it drop, replacing the vulnerability with a soft hum of an old jazz tune, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the armrest. The cracks widened during the downtime that wasn't, those enforced rest periods that felt more like holding patterns in a storm. In the Jeju house the company rented for a week of supposed recovery, Taehyung wandered the pebble-streaked beaches at odd hours, collecting shells that caught the dawn's first blush, their ridges etched like whispered confessions. He'd return with pockets bulging, dumping them onto the kitchen table where Seekjin was attempting a gourmet breakfast, only to scatter them into patterns. A spiral here, a jagged heart there. Fortune-telling seashells, he'd announce with a flourish, assigning each a personality. "This one's the comedian, always cracking up the ocean." The table would erupt in easy mirth, the salt-tinged air lightening the unspoken strain of upcoming enlistments and the ever-looming question of what came after the spotlight dimmed. Yet later, alone in his room with the door cracked just enough for the waves to murmur through, he'd trace the shell's curves with a fingertip, wondering if they, too, hid their fractures beneath iridescent veneers. It was Yoongi who first glimpsed the undercurrent, in the way only a fellow quiet storm could. During a late-night session in the home studio, walls lined with vinyl sleeves and fairy lights casting a perpetual twilight, Taehyung had been layering harmonies for a solo track, his voice weaving through the speakers like smoke curling from a hidden fire. Midway he paused, rewinding the take with a frustrated huff masked as a yawn. "Nah, too much gravel in that one. Sounds like I swallowed a cat." Yoongi, hunched over the mixing board with headphones looped around his neck like a talisman, didn't look up immediately. When he did, his gaze was steady, unblinking. "Or maybe it's just you for once. Let it be raw." The words hung there, simple as a chord progression, but they landed like a stone in still water. Taehyung's grin faltered just a beat, before he recovered with a playful shove. "Raw? I'd scare the fans away. V's secret weapon, existential blues." They both laughed, but Yoongi filed it away, the way one catalogs storm clouds on the horizon as the years telescoped, wings clipped by pandemics, then unfurled in a blaze of virtual concerts and sold-out tours. The humor evolved, sharpening into something almost architectural, buttressing the spaces where weariness threatened to spill. At a fan meeting in Tokyo amid the cherry blossom confetti and synchronized cheers, a young fan pressed a letter into his hand, her eyes wide with the gravity of adolescence. "Taehyung SSI, your jokes make my bad days bearable. Thank you for being our light." He read it on stage, voice steady, then folded it into his pocket with a bow that dipped deeper than usual. "Light? I'm more like a firefly, blink and you miss the glow." The audience cooed, but back in the dressing room, he unfolded the paper again, tracing the careful Hangul loops, and for a moment, the room's mirrors reflected not the idol but the man. Shoulders rounded under an invisible yoke, the humor scaffolding creaking under the load. This dance of deflection rippled outward, etching patterns in the ecosystem of adoration that sustained him. Fans, in their boundless ingenuity, built cathedrals from his quips, memes that migrated across oceans, fanfics where his wit disarmed metaphorical dragons, therapy playlists anchored by his ad-libs. Yet in the quiet forums, the ones lit by midnight screens and anonymous handles, whispers gathered. "He's carrying us all, but who's carrying him?" It was a question that echoed in the group's private chats, in the stolen glances during soundchecks when he'd mask a yawn with an exaggerated stretch, proclaiming himself the human sloth of BTS. Namjoon would nod, ever the philosopher, murmuring about the burdens of visibility, while Hoseok would counter with a back pat and a "let's snap attack later, yeah?" Practical magic against the grind. But the true unraveling came in fragments, pieced together like a mosaic in low light. There was the award show afterparty in a gilded Bangkok ballroom, where champagne flutes chimed like distant bells and industry suits circled like sharks scenting blood. Taehyung, tie loosened and hair artfully tousled, held court at a corner table, regaling a cluster of reporters with the tale of his epic battle with a rogue elevator that morning, complete with sound effects and a mimed dramatic escape. Laughter cascaded, flashbulbs popping like fireworks, But across the room, Jungkook caught the tail end, his brow furrowing as he watched Taehyung's free hand clench the stem of his glass of fraction too tightly. Later, in the hotel suite with its panoramic view of the Chow Phraya glittering like a vein of liquid silver, Jungkook cornered him by the balcony doors. Hyung, that story. Did the elevator really trap you? Or was it just? Taehyung leaned against the railing, the city wind tugging at his shirt, and for once the quip stalled on his tongue. Just a prop, Kuka. Keeps the plot moving. But his voice carried a husk, like paper thinned by too many folds, and Jungkook didn't press, instead slinging an arm around his shoulders, the silence between them a bridge of its owa and the broader tapestry. This concealed cadence spoke to something elemental. The alchemy of public personae, where idols aren't just performers but vessels for collective dreams, their cracks sealed with the epoxy of expectation. K-pop's glittering facade, with its relentless innovation and emotional osmosis, demands this sleight of hand, humor as the great equalizer, leveling the terror of exposure. Taehyung embodied it not through calculation but instinct, his Taegu roots infusing the mask with a rustic authenticity. The farm boy's knack for turning toil into tales, where a busted tractor becomes folklore fodder. Yet it underscored a poignant asymmetry in the idol-fan bond, that fervent reciprocity where devotees pour out their souls in oceans of purple light sticks, only to receive back echoes filtered through performance. We see the grin, the glint, the grace, the where beneath remains a private choreography, danced in dressing room shadows and red-eye flights as the group's odyssey bent toward horizons uncharted. Solo ventures blooming like wildflowers in the cracks of collective pause. Taehyung's shield began to shimmer with new hues. During a live from his art-cluttered apartment, paint-splattered canvases leaning like drunken sentinels against walls adorned with Polaroids of friends frozen in mid-laugh, he fielded a question about burnout with his usual finesse. Burnout? Nah, I'm solar-powered, just need a good sunset recharge. The chat scrolled with affirmations, but he lingered on the camera after sign-off, the feed cutting to black while his reflection stared back from the darkened screen. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the pavement, harbingers of change, and he stepped onto the fire escape, phone forgotten, to watch the sky bruise into twilight. In that suspended hush, the humor softened, revealing not fracture but filigree, the intricate work of a soul that had learned to bend without shattering. Months later, at an understated cafe in Itaewon, tucked between vinyl shops and graffiti-splashed alleys, he met a small group of fans for an impromptu chat, the kind arranged through back channels and trusted intermediaries. No cameras, no scripts, just steaming mugs of yuzu tea, and the tentative bridge of shared silences. When one girl, voice barely above a whisper, admitted her own battles with the weight of ambition, Taehyung didn't pivot to punchline. Instead, he reached across the scarred wooden table, his palm upturned like an offering. Some days the laugh is the hardest part, he said, the words unadorned, landing soft as snowfall. But it reminds me we're all just trying to see each other through the fog. The table stilled, then exhaled, and in that exchange the mask yielded, not vanished but translucent, allowing the weariness to breathe alongside the wit. From there, the narrative refracted, illuminating the quiet revolutions in how we witness our icons, not as monoliths but mosaics, their humor a lantern swung in the dark, guiding without fully revealing the hand that holds it. Taehyung's journey, etched in stolen glances and stage-side slights, became a cipher for the unspoken pacts of visibility, how we in our voracious gaze co-author the veils they wear, and how in rarefied moments of mutuality, those veils part to let in the light. It wasn't a grand unveiling, no tear-streaked confession under confetti rain, but a gradual dawn, the boy who joked through jet lag evolving into the man who invites us to laugh not at the surface, but with the depths. And so in the arenas yet to come, when the chants swell and the lights fracture into prisms, we'll watch for that flicker again, the shadow behind the smile, and this time perhaps extend our own quiet hand, not to shatter the shield but to share its weight, in the understanding that true connection blooms not from perfection, but from the brave art of showing just enough. Taehyung steps forward into the beam, grin flashing like a promise, and the crowd rises not oblivious but awake, seeing at last the full spectrum of the star who lights their way. As the twilight deepened into a velvet shroud over Itaewon, Taehyung lingered at the cafe table long after the fans had trickled out, their footsteps fading like echoes in a half-remembered dream. The yuzu steam had long since curled away, leaving rings on the wood that mirrored the faint circles under his eyes. marks of a man who traded sleep for symphonies of solitude. He traced one with his thumb, the gesture absent, mechanical, until the barista's soft chime of closing bells pulled him back. Outside, the street pulsed with a different rhythm. Neon signs flickering like hesitant fireflies, vendors hawking skewers that sizzled with secrets, and clusters of strangers weaving through the night, each carrying their own concealed cargo of quiet despairs. Taehyung slipped his mask back on, not the literal one but the one woven from years of spotlight scrimshaw, and melted into the flow, his stride loose, unhurried, as if the city's chaos were just another set piece in his perpetual improv. But divergence beckoned, sharp as a sudden chord change. Where once his humor had been the buoy keeping him afloat in the group's tidal pool, the solo chapters unfurled like a jazz solo stretching into uncharted scales, raw, meandering, laced with the minor keys he'd only hinted at before. Layover, his debut album, wasn't the bombast of arena anthems but a mosaic of murmurs. Tracks that slithered through jazz lounges in his mind, horns wailing like lovesick ghosts, bass lines throbbing with the ache of unspoken goodbyes. He composed it in stolen slivers, dawn breaks in a Berlin hotel where the curtains bled gray light, or midnight scribbles on napkins in a New York diner, grease stains blooming like abstract Rorschachs beside lyrics that clawed at the veil. Slow Dancing, the single that dropped like a stone into still water, wasn't a love song so much as a confession disguised as choreography. Bodies swaying in perpetual almost touch, the space between them humming with what-ifs. Critics called it introspective wanderlust. Fans dissected it in sleepless threads, but Taehyung, in a rare interview snippet clipped from a foggy Paris cafe, let slip the underbelly. It's about the dances we do alone, when the music's just echoes in your chest. This pivot wasn't rebellion but refraction. A light bent through prisms of perspective, scattering the boyish quips into something thornier, more textured. In the vacuum left by BTS's orchestrated hiatus, he chased horizons that smelled of salt and canvas. A painting retreat in the Amalfi Cliffs, where the Tyrrhenian Sea gnawed at ochre rocks like a persistent doubt, and he daubed canvases with fury, cobalt blues bleeding into sienna storms. There, away from the algorithmic gaze, the humor molted, shedding its performative plumage for something barbed and private. He'd video call the members from a cliffside villa, easel tilted against the wind, smudges of ochre on his cheek like war paint. Guys, I tried painting the sea, it fought back. Now it's got teeth. Laughter crackled through the line, but laced with it was a new timbre. Self-mockery edged with the sting of self-discovery, the kind that asks not for applause but absolution. The world, ever voracious, reshaped around this evolution. Collaborations bloomed like nightshade in the undergrowth. A track with a reclusive jazz trumpeter in Tokyo's back-alley clubs, where cigarette haze wreathed their duets in amber. A short film score for a Sundance darling, strings keening over footage of fractured families adrift in urban sprawl. Fans, those loyal alchemists, transmuted the shift into scripture. TikToks layering his solos over montages of solitary walks, essays and fanzines pondering if V's voice was the sound of velvet unraveling. Yet the divergence deepened in the off-screen interstices, where the idol's orbit intersected with the artist's eclipse. In a soul gallery tucked into a Hongdae alley, narrow as a vein and lit by filament bulbs that hummed like distant beehives, he unveiled his first solo exhibit, Veiled Echoes. Canvases loomed like sentinels, portraits of blurred faces, eyes rendered in smudged charcoal that suggested rather than defined, backgrounds swirling with motifs of fractured mirrors and wilted jazz notes. The opening night thrummed with the low murmur of collectors and critics, champagne flutes clinking like hesitant Morse code. But Taehyung moved through it like a shadow puppet, his smiles economical, his quips doled out like rare coins. These? Just my way of saying the reflections always lying a little. It was there amid the varnish-scented hush, that a curator sharp-eyed, silver-streaked, with a voice like rustling newsprint, cornered him by a piece titled Laughter's Lining. A canvas where grins fractured into geometric shards, each edge gilded with fool's gold. Kim SSI, this isn't deflection, it's dissection. What are you carving out here? He paused, the room's chatter fading to a dull roar in his ears, and for a beat the old reflex twitched. A joke about canvases being cheaper than therapy. But it died unspoken, replaced by a tilt of his head, that boxy jaw setting in quiet resolve. The parts we polish for the light, maybe. Or the ones we bury so deep they start to glow on their own. She nodded, scribbling in a leather-bound notebook, and in that exchange something unlocked. Not a floodgate but a skylight admitting slivers of the man beyond the myth from this fulcrum. The narrative forked wildly, threading into terrains far from the arena's roar. He delved into philanthropy not as photo op but pilgrimage, funding art workshops in Taegyu's forgotten corners, where kids with calloused hands from factory shifts learn to wield brushes like weapons against invisibility. In one such space, a converted warehouse with walls peeling like old skin, he'd sit cross-legged on scuffed floors, demonstrating shading techniques with the patience of a storyteller unfurling a parable. See? Shadows aren't enemies, they're what make the light mean something. The children, eyes wide as saucers, would mimic his strokes, their laughter raw and unfiltered, and in those afternoons, Taehyung found a humor reborn. Not the shield but the salve, quips traded like currency in a barter of broken things. This one's got more drama than my last breakup, he'd say of a kid's stormy seascape, drawing giggles that echoed off the rafters, binding wounds without a word. Yet divergence invited shadows of its own, the kind that slink in on cat's paws. Tabloids, those relentless hounds, scented blood in the quiet. Whispers of reclusive speculation swirling like smoke around rumored romances with phantom muses, or the arrogance of an artist who dared to step sideways from stardom's conveyor. Social media churned, a digital maelstrom where stan wars erupted over his moody phase, pixels weaponized in debates that dissected his Instagram grids like autopsy slides. Taehyung, scrolling in the witching hour from a high-rise eyrie overlooking the Han's serpentine gleam, felt the old fracture twinge, not rage but a weary amusement, the kind that curdles into quiet resolve. He'd post then, cryptic as a koan, a photo of his hand splayed against fogged glass, palm print dissolving into rain-streaked blur, captioned only with a single jazz emoji, saxophone curved like a question mark. The comments cascaded, love letters, litanies, the occasional barb, but he read them like tide pools, glimpsing the world's undercurrents without diving in. This solitary spiral crested in a collaboration unforeseen. A voiceover for an indie doc on migrant artists, voices from the diaspora weaving tales of rootless reinvention. Taehyung's narration, gravel-hued and unadorned, threaded the film like a vein of stories of Syrian painters in Athens squats, Ethiopian sculptors hammering iron in Johannesburg foundries, each exile a testament to creation's defiant pulse. Recording in a makeshift booth in Busan's Port District, waves crashing like irregular applause against concrete piers, he leaned into the mic, words tumbling with a vulnerability stripped bare. They carry homes in their hands, remaking worlds from what's left. The director, a wiry woman with tattoos mapping forgotten borders, watched him through the glass, her nod a silent covenant. When the film premiered at Busan Fest, under a sky bruised with monsoon promise, the standing ovation washed over him not as acclaim but anchor, tethering the drifter back to soiled iron, these far-flung folds, the original veil thinned to translucence, revealing not just fatigue's ghost but resilience's quiet forge. Taehyung's humor, once a solo act, became ensemble, traded in late-night texts with Jungkook over shared sketches of absurd inventions, a hat that translates dog barks into poetry, or in voice memos to Yoongi layering beatbox beats over existential gripes. Young life's like bad ramen. Overcooked, underseasoned, but add enough hot sauce. The replies came laced with their own barbs, a chorus of ciphers sustaining the solo flight. And in the fans' evolving lexicon this became legend, army evolving from spectators to co-conspirators, their fan arts now fractal maps of his moods, mosaics where laughs fractured into landscapes, weariness rendered in watercolor washes. Yet the deepest divergence lay in reclamation, the man reclaiming the boy, circling back to Taegyu's sun-baked fields where he'd first learned to jest against the grind of harvest dawns. He returned unannounced, slipping into a family dinner under the eaves of his childhood home, the air thick with gochujang tang and the low hum of cicadas. His father, hands veined like ancient roots, clapped his shoulder with a grip that said more than sermons. His mother, eyes crinkling like his own, slid an extra bowl of banchan his way without fanfare. There, amid the clatter of chopsticks and half-told tales of neighborhood scandals, the humor flowed unbidden, impersonations of his teenage self attempting guitar solos that sounded like dying cats, drawing belly laughs that rattled the rafters. No cameras, no captions, just the balm of blood-deep belonging, mending the seams strained by spotlights as the wheel turned toward reunion's horizon, BTS's gears grinding back toward cohesion. These detours etched indelible grooves, transforming the shield into a kaleidoscope. Taehyung emerged not unscarred but multifaceted, the jester with a philosopher's undergirding, his quips now carrying the weight of worlds traversed. In rehearsals reconvened, the air crackled anew, his ad-libs landing like grace notes in a long-awaited refrain, but richer, resonant with the roads not taken, and in this refracted light we, the watchers, the weavers of purple seas, find our own mirrors held up. How often do we cloak our own exhaustions in clever cloaks, mistaking deflection for depth? Taehyung's Odyssey, with its humorous helices and solitary spirals, whispers a radical invitation to laugh not as armor, but as aperture, letting the light and the shadows dance together. What veils do you wear in your daily masquerade? And what might bloom if you let one slip, just a fraction? Share in the comments below. Your stories, your suspicions, your sparks of seeing through. Let's unravel a thread or two together.